G'day everyone. I'm Riley Coleman. I have I've known Ben for a long time, but over the last sort of year or so, as I've come back to Australia, we've caught up quite a few times, and I think that we've sort of riffed about AI quite a few times in terms of sharing what each other's doing and things like that. And so one of the reasons I brought Ben in is because of some work that I was doing with the course that I teach people, and talking about, how do you actually go for the next level in terms of your AI maturity. And that really comes down to systemizing things so that you're not having to reinvent the wheel every time. You're getting a lot more of that advantage baked in from the very start, and things like that. So building something that is more sustainable, that is able to be used in your daily work, and also it learns alongside you, because right now, obviously, different AI systems are learning systems, but they're kind of learning at scale and behind big kind of retraining moments. So this is why Ben's coming in, because he has set up his own AI operating system, which is called Regen. And is it like, I wonder if it's like Siri, Ben, you can tell us, like, do you say Regen and it's listening to you for that or something? But
it's not someone called Re or Jen.
So he's going to walk through how he is, hi Oliver, he's going to walk through how he is, had thought through this process, how he approached both building it, iterating and sort of developing it over time. And then also how he uses it, and how that, what advantage, like why would you go into doing this essentially? What sort of advantage does that offer you? And how does he actually leverage it in the way that he works every day? So this is part of a series of workshops that I'm bringing together for a community that I'm sort of starting called Human-Centered AI Community. So looking at, the advantages and the opportunities that AI brings, sort of co-learning together, but also talking about things like how do you do personalization without breaching people's privacy. So really looking at the ethical, human-centered side of it as well. And so thank you, Ben, for joining us. Ben has been working for decades within design. He currently leads an organization called Dynamic 4. And some of you folks in Sydney in particular may know Ben from his, I think it's you said 11th birthday Sydney Design Thinking. Is that correct? Yep. So he's been facilitating and running the Sydney Design Thinking community for the last 11 years, which is a really, really, huge kind of thing to be doing for that long a period of time. So he's been contributing to the design community, particularly in Sydney, from a long time advantage point of view. And so it's a real pleasure to have Ben come in and talk us through how he actually approaches this, and answers all your questions. So save them. You can put them in the chat and we'll come to them at the end. Alternatively, you can save them to the end and obviously say them out. But if you think of anything as he's going through, please, by all means, throw it in the chat and we'll come to that at the very end. So without further ado, I'd love to invite Ben to, take the lead and to, tell us everything we can learn from you and your awesome Regen OS.
Let's not get carried away. Thanks, Riley. Awesome. Great to see you all. Lots of familiar faces and a bunch of fresh ones as well. So great to meet you. Just want to acknowledge that I'm lucky to live, work and play on Gadigal country, and pay my respects to elders past, present and future. As Riley mentioned, I'm Ben. Hi. I thought it might be worth me just quickly sharing kind of the perspective that I come at this with, because there's a lot of talk about AI and it's kind of everywhere all the time, all at once. A lot of it's hyperbole and there's lots of fear and scaremongering as part of that. And a lot of it comes very much from a tech perspective. But I do come at it from a tech perspective, but also with some other perspectives to it as well. So the way I spend my days is literally from boardrooms to pixels, DevOps, and AI, and all the bits in between. So it's not just a tech orientation to this. Lots of that's around business model innovation, product, service, and organizational design, designing and delivering project-based leadership programs. So there's a lot of that kind of stuff in play. And another way that a bunch of you will probably already know is that I'm a bit of a governance, data, systems, design, product, tech, and learning geek. So where all of those things come together and hang out, that's kind of where I hang out. And I can see a bunch of you already here that I get to collaborate with and do that fun stuff with as well. And so a lot of that's really about how do we work with people to design and build business models, products, and services that customers and teams really love. They actually make money, because without that, we don't get to keep doing it. And they do great things for people on our planet, all while increasing well-being. So everything I do is focused on how do we help accelerate the transition to more regenerative ways of living and doing business. And that's how I spend my days now. In terms of what I've been doing, over the last 30 plus years, I've been designing and building digital products, services, and experiences, and also the teams and organizations that actually deliver those things. And how do you, again, it's not just the design and tech, but how do you actually bring that together as an integrated system? I spend about 80% of my time actually doing the work, and I try to keep talking about it, coaching, teaching, writing to about 20%. So everything I do is very much in current practice and real world experience, not just theory, or I remember a time 10 years ago when we used to do it this way, and that's now completely obsolete and irrelevant. I find it really important that I stay completely every day in the practice as well. I wrote a book 5 years ago, it's hard to believe it's 5 years, called Solve Problems That Matter, which was all about how to design, build, and launch your social enterprise idea. And I am in the middle of writing a new book, and this is actually the first tease of the working title, which is Lead What Matters. And that is all about how to design the conditions for momentum. So working title, I'll be testing that yet, but it's very much around leadership and how do we adapt to all the increasing expectations, including Gen AI and how that impacts people and teams and organizations. So a few moving parts there. Hopefully that helps sort of frame this not as a tech thing. It is very much technology enabling, but it's actually more about the people, the process, the organizations, performance, workflows, habits, all those other things that actually are the way that we've always needed to do work. So a very quick, hopefully in the right room, this is what we'll cover. And a lot of this I've kind of been hesitant to share publicly because things move so fast. And literally, can say something tonight and by the morning it'll already be out of date. And in fact, it might already be happening while I'm saying these words. In between running a version of this workshop back on the 7th of July, so less than 3 weeks ago, huge number of things have changed. The day that I ran that workshop, there were 2 app updates, one on Claude Desktop, one on ChatGPT, or it's Codex still at the time. That was an hour before I started the workshop. That was on a Tuesday night. By Friday, there was no longer a Codex app as the desktop app for ChatGPT. It had been merged in, and ChatGPT Work was announced, and Codex was another angle of that. And a few days later, they even dropped the work part of ChatGPT in the little toggle. So, little things like that, just the way you even find and interact with these models and those harnesses or apps that are wrapped around them, literally changing by the hour. And if you haven't seen, in the last couple of days, Claude has released, or Anthropic has released Opus 5. So you probably heard all about Mythos, and then you heard about Fable 5. That model disappeared for a few weeks, came back, fresh guardrails on it, and now Opus 5 has been released, and that is already outperforming Fable 5 that was banned by the US government on a whole bunch of benchmarks. The other key sort of things that are, without diving into all the tech side of this, because it relates directly to the stuff we're talking about, is both ChatGPT/Codex and Claude got real-time voice directly into their desktop apps, so you can control things in a real-time voice scenario, which you couldn't before Friday. You could do dictation, but you couldn't do real-time voice interaction. And my biggest breakthrough of the last few days, weeks, can't even remember how long it's been, it's probably only been a week and a half, is that completely undocumented feature on Codex, where now I have my team members, my synthetic team members, directly DMing each other and being able to hand off work to each other and QA each other's work according to a workflow that I've designed, and completely undocumented feature. And I was trying to solve team collaboration, and it suddenly went, hey, I can do this now. And a few days earlier, it couldn't do that. Haven't seen any announcements of that anywhere else either. So it's this kind of stuff that is happening all the time. So even though I just spoke about it for the last couple of minutes, I'm not going to talk about product features because they are literally changing that fast. The thing I'm going to focus on, and we'll talk about together, is really the enduring principles that last. So the ways of working, the mindset, the workflows, the things that actually are stable regardless of what the model and the harness can do today. So that's where I find there's more value in thinking about, because everything's changing so fast. Something I'm not going to cover today is the ethics and climate impacts. Extremely important topics, love to talk about them, but that could be many hours of conversation, and often one's best to have at the pub anyway. The other thing this isn't is a build along session. So it's very much about the principles and the architecture and the ways of working, but it's not going to be a workshop to sort of build your own. Hopefully there'll be enough in there that you can sort of take it and apply, but it's not that guided version of things. So the main thing I'm going to focus on as we go through this is really on not technical work, not writing code. And when you hear about these types of workflows and operating systems, they're almost always in a code and development context. I'm not going to talk about that at all. I'm going to assume that everyone is here because you want the non-tech version, and it's very much about the knowledge work. And so because of that, very much focusing on unstructured, ambiguous knowledge work, not even automated processes of business process of how do you get step A, B, C to happen really fast. So it's working in that really uncertain, ambiguous, free-flowing, unstructured version of using these tools is the main thing that I'm going to focus on. So very quickly, the other thing is we say AI now, and we very specifically almost always mean generative AI. So AI has been around not since November 22. It's been emerging since the 1950s. And there's been these different waves of AI, and they have had different capabilities, different ways of training, different things they could do, and different levels of adoption as well. And so as these waves have come through and the next wave starts, it hasn't stopped the previous wave. It's often built on top of. And then now with Gen AI, they're actually all working together. But when we're talking about the frontier models, foundational models like ChatGPT or Claude or Copilot or a lot of the others, we're specifically talking about Gen AI as the thing. And so for a few years, I held on to, I refused to say AI unless I specifically meant the other versions of AI. But we're past that point. So speaking the language of the customer, I'm going along with it. So when I say AI in this context, I'm pretty much only talking about Gen AI. And AI as an amplifier is an amplifier. So it's an accelerant. It doesn't actually really, a lot of the things that we talk about when the hype starts up around AI, it's actually not new stuff. They're actually more people, culture, process, workflow, and data challenges than they are technical ones. So the same set of challenges we've had for decades / tens of thousands of years. They're the same types of behaviors and how do we work together. And there's a lot of fear that comes in through that. So I find it's really important that we keep that perspective and that we sort of zoom out and we don't just hone in on the last sort of 3.5 years of Gen AI hitting mainstream. If we zoom out and we keep that perspective, we actually see that longer time arc and we're traveling faster and with different tools. But as we look back, there's a lot of really familiar patterns. And we've learned a lot of things over decades of how to navigate those complexities. So I think it's really important to do that zooming out. And something I really want to emphasize is while I'm sharing this stuff, I'm definitely not saying that I've got the answers. I'm not an AI expert, and I'm not a Gen AI expert. And anyone that tells you that they're a Gen AI expert, I think it's pretty safe to say that they're lying to you and or delusional. Because even the makers of the models or the growers of the models, as it's sometimes now referred to, because we don't actually even know how they work. The neural network, and we can see the effects and we can see the pre-training and some of the inference, but we don't actually understand anymore what's happening inside the models. So some people actually talk about these models now growing, the conditions and the nurturing and some things are put together to grow them, but there's not a direct cause and effect of making them as there once was. So this is very much emergent practice, and there are no experts in emergence. And learning starts with not knowing. So let's get into not knowing together. So the key thing I'm really curious about to kick off is you, your data, and how you use AI. So I'd love to be able to see wherever possible, including with Andrew's animatronics head, which is awesome. But chuck in the chat, let me know a little bit about what you're actually using in terms of AI models and tools right now. What's your tool or tools of choice? Jess has got the paid, the Flash Copilot, Claude. And Virginia, when you say Claude, any particular version? Are you using it in browser, using the desktop app? Victor's got Codex Claude Code. So sounding more on the dev side, desktop for Virginia, awesome. It's mostly the ChatGPT and the Claude side of things, which would match all the download data. Some Figma Make. Ollie's living large with the new Siri. So what he means to say is he's using Gemini. Gemini mashed together with a bit of Apple love. What else we got? Claude Code, Opus, Gemini. Awesome. That's given me a good sort of sense. And when you're using your models, where do you find the good stuff goes when that session or chat ends? What happens to the outputs that you create in those little interactions? Into Riley's own neural network. Awesome, good. Before, during, and after, I hope. And since we've got more neurons outside of the brain than inside, then I hope that's embodied AI. Docs, HTML, skills, nice. Some scripts. John's geeking out with some Python. Creating prototypes. Excellent. And what's the situation here? How often do you find that you're repeating yourself across different chats or interactions? Is that a rare thing or a most session thing? A bunch of too oftens. Nigel's reg, good. That means some stuff's already set up. Howling. Riley's got it sorted. Nice. And now, not even thinking strictly in an AI context, Well, what's your data? What data do you have? You don't just have CSVs and spreadsheets, Ollie. You got more interesting data than that. Documents and web. So Ollie might be letting us in on where it does and does not trust AI to play right now. PowerPoints, docs. Awesome. And the big question, and one of the things of if this makes you a little bit nervous to answer or you don't know, this is definitely your homework. Where does it live? Where's your data right now? How many places? Do you know all the places? GitHub. Nigel's definitely got the dev rig going. Everywhere. Superbase, nice. GitHub. And the final one for this set, for all that data that you've got and all those places it lives, what needs to be working for you to be able to access it when you need it? So if you said anything other than on your own device, you've got a lot of infrastructure that needs to be available. So the interweb needs to be available for Kev. GitHub needs to be up. And if it's on GitHub, then you need a whole bunch of infrastructure between your device and GitHub to be working in the clouds. And we have got to a point where the internet, and just saying the internet needs to be working, is almost like a passable answer because we rely on it so heavily every day. But if you think about all the moving parts that need to be up and going and working to standard to be able to even browse a web page, let alone get to your real data, that's a lot of moving parts that you've got little to no control of. And for anyone who doesn't pay for data when they're on a flight and you need to get to that file because you really need it, then it might give you a sense of what it can feel like when you can't get the data you need. And so data, it really kicks things off. And you've probably, seen a version of this pyramid or this pyramid specifically before. We've got the data, we turn that into information through synthesis and knowledge, and then hopefully we get insight out the top of it. And then all of that then wraps together as our experience. And so data, it's so important and it's so critical to everything, but not just because we love data, even though I do, but it starts the process, but it's actually our experience that gives it meaning. So it's all of those other things that wrap around it. If it's just an isolated piece of data, you might not care too much about it, but our experience gives it meaning. So if you think of a photo, a piece of music, a message, something that's really important to you, and you actually think about that thing right now, and then if you think about how would you feel if you lost it? Because a lot of that stuff is now stored as data. And so even though it's just a data point or data element, the data by itself is not enough. It's all those relationships and context and memory and our lived experience that wraps around it that gives it meaning. And that's really why the current experience when people use AI is a little bit weird a lot of the time. It often feels extractive or disposable. And we go through some version of this a lot of the time where we sort of feel like we're starting over and over with someone that's really smart, but they've just, and lots of potential, but they just don't know us or remember us. So we ask something, we get an output, we might copy and paste that somewhere else. Then we want to build on it or do something more with it, loses context, and then you're back to sort of square one and you have to start again, and you start getting really frustrated of, I've already told you this, why am I telling you this again? And that's pretty infuriating. It's infuriating when it happens with people, and it's even more infuriating, I'd argue, when it happens with machines that are supposed to just remember everything all the time. But that's not the experience for a lot of us a lot of the time right now. So we create these what feel like really useful moments. You might even feel that excitement of, look at this thing, I'm starting to be able to do this thing with it. And then without the way the products are at the moment, a lot of the time, that is then a feeling of being let down, or that momentum drops away. There's no compounding value because it is like starting again. And so that results in our thinking being a bit scattered and our context. We feel disconnected, and our work's just really hard to find and reuse and build on. And so that's what the experience is for a lot of people today. How much of that feels familiar? From what people were saying in the chat, there was a fair bit, and there's been a few nods. So hopefully it's not triggering too many things. But that's where there's a huge opportunity, because the tools are actually capable of a lot of this now, but it does take that thinking about the workflow and the habits and building those things up. But being able to move from a chat to actually having a synthetic team or an agent team or the bots or the AIs or whatever you want to refer to that to. But I think of it as my synthetic team. And so as I've been designing Regen OS, and it's very much a work in progress, and it's something literally working on every day because it iterates as I'm doing real work with it. But it's really about how to make AI a compounding asset, and with data that you actually own, and you own and have control of it locally, not just when somebody else's infrastructure is available. So all of that value is actually yours to use when and how you need it. And so that flow of work happens. You get the useful stuff that's produced, if that's context or outputs, is written back to that safe place. Patterns that are valuable become reusable, and then the next session starts from that stronger base. And because of all of that, you end up with better thinking, clearer decisions, more momentum, and that's all because that context is getting carried forward and built on, rather than just left behind as a fragment in a browser window. And so this is an illustration version of Regen OS as a living loop. For those that were here for the first version, you'll see the next iteration of this. But there's 5 elements that form a stack, but it lives as a living loop. It actually works as a living loop. So the foundation, that's all your data, that's all that you own, it's durable, it's compounding, that's your stuff. And hopefully you can see from the icons made up of all those different file types that are really where our data and our digital life and our second brain and all of those types of things now live. The next layer, building on top of it, is the playbook. So that's how does the system actually behave. A really important one is the boundary. So that shield over the top of what's AI safe, what's allowed, assisted, or explicitly human only, of don't touch this. AI, hands off, this is my stuff. You either don't even know it exists, or you get to read it only, or you have a certain set of permissions to interact with it. And then across the top are the engines, and it's plural. So there was a few people in the chat that were talking about using multiple models. The whole idea here is that you can use multiple at once and not lose your team, that you still get all the benefits of as if you're using one model and you don't have platform lock-in, and you reduce that risk that one platform's going to disappear or change their policy or get banned by the government or change their pricing model or do any number of things that if you don't have that designed, then all your data could literally gone. And that, to me, is a really scary thought. And now all of that comes together then into the studio. And that's who works with who. So the human in the studio, but then who are these synthetic team members? What are their roles? What memory and context are they working with? How do they interact? And that's where the work's done. And then the regeneration, so the system can keep recovering and compounding, and the continuity that you're picking up from where you left off rather than having to start again. So in terms of kind of the loop of how that works, so a studio member reads the foundation, they get their memory and context, they get the rules of the game from the playbook, the boundary determines what can be read, changed, suggested, or decided, so the rules of that access and interaction. One of the engines or multiple of the engines and tools, you do the work through their app and the harness, and then the useful outputs are then written back into the playbook and the foundation, and then the whole system regenerates and gets stronger over time, and so you get that compounding value. So that's the sort of architecture at a snapshot. We'll come back to that a little bit more soon. But I think there's a really important part here because, as we we're talking about before, a lot of this isn't actually about the tech. It's about the mental model and the workflow and the paradigm that we bring to it. So when you think of this literally as your team rather than just a random chatbot, and you apply a lot of the principles that you've probably used over years of working with new team members, onboarding, hiring new team members, how do you bring them up to speed? What work do you give to them when, that leadership aspect of things and the management of how do you manage things is a really important mental model that I think flows through all of this. And so rather than it just being a set of random things doing random stuff, or even just it's one model, so I'll just give it all the things in one chat and it can sort itself out in the background, then each team member actually has, when they're a team member, they have a clear role and scope. So here's your JD basically, and this is what your skills needed to be. This is the context that you're working with, and this is how you play with other members of the team. And here's the playbook of how our workflow works when we're doing work together. It's got the context it needs. Each has its own memory that carries forward, and you're renting that intelligence from one of the engines or one or more of the engines. And then when something's repeatable, then we can turn that into a skill, and those skills are transferable across team members as well. And so it's all about being able to set the direction, define those boundaries. But as the human, we are always accountable for our synthetic team and everything that they do, everything they produce or don't produce, and the quality of it, and any misbehavior. Whatever happens there as the human, that's on us. And so even looking at this as a sort of picture of the architecture, this isn't actually a team-based model. So each human has their own synthetic team, and then how each human works with other humans in a real person team, that is then another level of design. But every human is bringing their own synthetic team to the broader team. Does that make sense? There's a whole thing on holons and holacracy, but I'm going to stay away from that org design stuff just for now. A quick one on as a little bit of a before and how some of these things have morphed over time. A bunch of you will know that I have a little ongoing creative project called Music Meanderings, where I do somewhere like 150 plus micro reviews of albums, my favorite albums having a major anniversary or new releases. And so that's an always on project. I've been doing it for years. And for the anniversaries, that takes a fair bit of admin. And so I need to go through my iTunes library, get my 4 and 5 star rated albums, get all of those that are having an anniversary for the year, get those into a sheet. So I've got the year, but I don't yet know the date. And then I need to find out the specific date, because I post on the date that it's having a major anniversary, not the general year. So I need to go get that info. So before AI, I'd have to go and research, and I might be looking at a sheet of 150 of these. I used to go and drop that into a Google search, go get the release date, when you get older than a 2005 album, then it gets sometimes pretty hard, and especially if it's not really mainstream, it can start taking a lot of digging to get the actual release date. So I used to have to do all of that manually. I have to remember all the things all the time and do it all myself. And then ChatGPT and Perplexity happened. And so when I was doing it in 2023, I was giving it batches and to both Perplexity and to ChatGPT. And I would then compare their output. And ChatGPT would just extremely confidently lie to me and tell me a date. And I'd go, that doesn't sound quite right. And I'd get the same output from Perplexity, and Perplexity would more often say, I don't know, I can't find that. And I would then do a compare. But it meant in late 2023 when I was doing this, I still had to do all of that manually and spot check. And because I couldn't trust it, I had to mostly do it manually, and everything that I did have, I'd have to fact check. By late 2024, when I was doing that again, it was in a very different state. And this time it had the basics handled pretty well. I could upload a spreadsheet, could do some restructuring of that sheet, but it couldn't really do the work. By late 2025, I was able to say, I need this. I gave it the list, and it was able to go and accurately, and this was ChatGPT this time, and fact check with Claude, was actually able to factually go and get that info for me. We're now at a point, only a few months later, where I won't even need to do any of that myself in terms of going to get that data. I'll actually be able to give one of my agents or team members the goal of, I want this for this reason, point to past examples, and it will actually be able to use computer use, do the export out of iTunes, do the filtering and sorting, and then go fill out the dates for me and tell me what my posting schedule is. So the pace of change over those years, and the reason I'm using something completely unbusiness related is because I want to make sure this is really not about coding, not about operational optimization and automation of workflows, really unstructured knowledge work. And how do you work with that type of situation, not just something that's pretty predictable? And so these are the different ways of working as the capabilities have changed over the years. So my question to you is, what synthetic team member would be most useful to you right now? And feel free to chuck it in the chat. Does anyone need some album release dates, or you got some other uses for these agents? And if you haven't got anything to chuck in the chat, have a think about what that might be. What's something that's on your plate right now that's you find frustrating, or you feel a bit stuck, or it's really labor intensive to get the data together? Visualizing skill sets of a team for specific projects, definitely. Business process, tacit knowledge extraction, doco. And as Riley mentioned, now the two major models of Claude and ChatGPT support just screen recording that. So a lot of the other platforms where you'd have to either do that manually or pay for a separate sub to be able to do things like SOPs and playbooks, that's all standard stuff now, or about to be. Virtual personal assistant, awesome, Kev. That is actually one of the hardest things, unless you've got a very operationalized, repeatable life. And as a designer, I know you don't. Then having a VA is really tricky when it's a human, especially when you don't have really repeatable loops on a timeline that makes sense to hire a VA. These types of models, when it's very unstructured, or it's something that happens in that little scenario I just gave of once a year, and I fact check it and do some other things every now and then, lots of power there. Awesome. Orchestrator. someone to work out my finances. Everything I say tonight is not financial advice, not legal advice, but I do have a financial advisor team member who does my statements of advice for me. And as the human, I am fully accountable for whatever it tells me and whatever I action, but it does all of that financial modeling for me. It looks product comparison, does all of that for me as same as a financial advisor would, and from my experience, does it better and for free. And recipes, awesome. Excellent. Lots of possible ways. And I think the mix of very business work-oriented things and lots of personal things, when it's your own synthetic team, you no longer have to delineate about that because you're building it for you and you can look at it whole of life. And then when you're looking in a business context, you can look at which parts of this will I share now with other team members in a business context. So being able to, that boundary line applies also to other humans and to other organizations, etc. So the bits that make all this possible, we've talked about this a little bit, but just to make it really explicit, because there's always preconditions for the good stuff to work, and a lot of it doesn't happen at once. So at the moment, the most powerful, especially again talking about non-tech, so we're not talking about code or dev, in a non-tech context, the supersets and what I find I spend most of my time with at the moment is the ChatGPT desktop app, which also now includes Codex in it. So it's one combined app now. Claude, and again, the desktop app, and Obsidian. So the key thing is with the models, you need the desktop app to really get the most value out of it now. You can get a bit of stuff out of the browsers and using connectors and even some MCPs and stuff, but it's just not the same experience as the app being able to work with your files locally and you telling it what's allowed to touch and not allowed to touch. So it's a completely different experience when you're using the desktop app of these same models that a lot of people have been using for months and years now. So the key thing, you need one of these apps on your desktop. Both support Mac and Windows, varying support for other OSs. Mac tends to get the features a week, 2-3 weeks earlier sometimes than Windows, though that has started to change over the last few weeks. And a key thing here is you actually don't need it all, and you don't need it all to be nice and clean, including your files and data, before you can make a start. You can actually get your AI to help you do a lot of that work once you've got the basics set up. You'll notice there a non-Gen AI icon, and that's Obsidian. So a lot of people keep asking me about Obsidian for some reason. If you use Notion, it's a lot like Notion, except for you don't need to pay them. It's free, open source, and all the files live on your devices and can be cloud synced, but they're yours to play with, not someone else's, and has a huge community with plugins and stuff wrapped around it, so you can do all sorts of stuff with it. So it's effectively the same as Notion for a lot of things. Basically, it's a text editor, just to almost go back on that. But that's effectively what Notion is as well. So it's what's emerged over the last 2-3 years is Markdown has become the de facto standard for the AI models as the file format. And Markdown is literally just a text file format. There's a specific syntax, but it's pretty much a plain text editor that then gets enhanced with some other stuff when you use things like Obsidian to be able to do some additional things on top. So it's nothing to be scared of. And it's not the only text editor or the only Markdown editor. So I use Obsidian as my main, but if I just want to read and I don't want it part of my more structured stuff, and I just want to open it from Finder Explorer, then I use an app called Mark Viewer, or you can literally open it in Notepad. It is literally a text file. So it's It's an open format, and that gives it a lot of future proofing. There have been talks, and there's a little bit of an ongoing debate of will HTML actually be the file format that AI runs on. It's possible, and even if it is, Markdown converts nicely and lots of things. And there's also ways to run this where all your files and a lot of what we're talking about is then run in a light database, which can also be run locally without server infrastructure. But I promised no repos and no tech stuff. So we won't talk about that, and no tech skills required. So I use Obsidian partly because I already had 30 plus years of my notes in it when it sort of took off earlier this year. So, and the reason I even had my notes in it was it fits a lot of my architecture principles about being Markdown files, that it's offline. I've always got access to it. I can access it across all of my devices, anytime, anywhere. Those are standard architecture principles I've had forever, and Obsidian fit that. And another key reason why I think Markdown still has a better chance than HTML at this stage is it's really easy to create a text document and edit it and read it. HTML mostly isn't. It normally takes a little bit more effort around that. Not impossible, but it's very easy to create and edit Markdown files. And it's extremely efficient as that layer that both humans and machines can read. So that's why I use Obsidian. The thing that I always have to show is everyone always wants to see the graph view of Obsidian. So it automatically creates these knowledge graphs. So every node that you can see there is a note in my file, and each of those files is literally a file on my hard drive. So as you interact with each, it will actually show here are the relationships that it has with other notes within your vault as well. So you can use that as a way to trace through that this note, this file, this piece of data has a relationship with another one within the file system. Useful for humans, and AI models especially love it because then it does the work of being able to scan and be able to trace things through. And you can animate your Obsidian graph showing how the different sort of nodes and relationships sort of grew over time. I don't find it that useful on a every moment of everyday use, but it is an interesting little feature, and everyone always, when they talk about Obsidian, want to see the graph. So there you go, you saw the graph. So now working with your synthetic team, what's it actually look like in action? So this is a very quick walkthrough, and it's a bit of a before, during, and after journey map. So before, these are the files that exist before any session, starting how we onboard a synthetic team member, and that's when the engines and the studio come into play. The during, so that's where the real context, and that's the studio at work. How you end a session, so you're actually making sure that you're compounding that value when regeneration can happen, and continuing so that same team member can then be used by a different engine, and you got that continuity. So the before, it is literally, as I said, Markdown. So these are just folders. The yellow ones are folders. The purple ones are Markdown files. And so these are just the files that sit on my machine. You'll see there in the playbook section. So this is how the rules of the game, basically. There's the architecture. You would have seen the brand. So my writing style, a dynamic 4 brand guidelines, bunch of assets. There's tools, there's skills, there's workflow, which includes things like a decision log and an agent daily log. So everything that the agents do, it actually logs into a running narrative of what it's doing. So it's always observable. And an action board, which is a Kanban board where my agents talk to each other and take work through a workflow. So all of these are literally just files on my machine. There's not a single line of code in any of this. And a big one is when you're thinking about your team, what would your synthetic team need to know, follow, and never touch So if you had that idea of this team member you'd like to bring in, who just happens to be synthetic, what are the things that you need to know? And whatever you're thinking of there, that's the foundation. That's a lot of the context. That's the material. So if you had a human new starter in your team, what's the onboarding guide? What files do you point them at? What history do you give them? What do they need to know about you? The follow is the playbook. How do you actually work? What are your ways of working? What are your standards? How does work get allocated and approved as done? And then there's the never touch, or the this is yours, but you can only use it in this way. And that's the boundary. So when you got clarity on that, and you don't need to have absolute clarity to get started, but especially with one team member to start with, you can use that as a way to start painting out the picture of how should this thing hang together. And as a role that when you're doing something like this, that I reckon is worth onboarding first, because then they end up being the thing that does the work and helps you think through things and guide you through it and helps you look at the unintended consequences of different decisions that you might be making. But that Chief Information and Intelligence Officer, CIIO, I use that role as my guide, and that actually turns everything into a coherent system that learns and, really importantly, self-heals. There's a whole bunch of skills that I build up, so that's a intentional loop as opposed to something that happens accidentally or only when something breaks. But it's everything you've seen to this point, all those files, you don't even need them all. You just need a little bit about who you are, how you like to work, spin this team member up, and then it can guide you through the rest. And so in terms of spinning up a team member, it can be as easy as just saying, this is who you are. So no mega prompts. And I'm actually a little bit anti giving people prompts, because when you copy prompts, you tend not to think about what you're actually asking. And 80% of that power of the interaction is actually the thinking that goes into it and the principles and how to frame what am I actually asking. And so what that's just done is I just said, you're my demo CIIO. Now go set up your files. And I've got some skills in the background, so it knows what that means. And again, those skills are literally just text files. And then it's gone and created its 3-state files. So that team member now has its context, and that's a bit of a shell at the moment, but it has some sections that it knows that it needs to get more information on, including a data library. It has its memory, which right now the only thing that's got in its memory is I was just spun up. And so that will live within the memory file. And then it also has an archive file, which I'll show you in a moment. And so now there's a new team member, and it literally just created those 3 files. So they're text files sitting on my hard drive. No line of code, nothing stuck in the model, nothing stuck in an app. Literally 3 text files on my hard drive. And so the during part is obviously when things get more interesting. And one of the other little projects I'm doing at the moment is my Swiss meanderings. It's a retrospective photo journal from my various meanderings around Switzerland and Montreux Jazz Festival. And so I've just said, go tell me about that project. What is it? Where am I at? What's happening? And I didn't give it that information. So it's now gone and checked out another team member's work, who is the team member that's been running all of this, and said, what is this thing? And it was able to do that because of the team directory. So it was able to find Swiss meanderings as part of the team and project directory. And now it's brought that across, and I can ask it some questions just to show that it is actually getting primary things. It's also getting things from the internet. This time 25 years ago, I was in La Chaux de Fonds, and so after this session, I need to go write my next post and sort through my photos from 25 years ago. So all of this has happened without me providing any real context. There was no rebriefing, and everything it's done, it now knows, and it knows in a durable way, and in a way where that information is stored on my hard drive. The other thing is that I get, and this is a demo one, so it's going to be probably some weird cards on there, but this is actually an Obsidian, so I'm not using Linear or Jira or Trello or ClickUp or anything else. This is a Kanban board, completely text-based, sitting in Obsidian, and each of my agents knows this is where you go to get work. I've got another role, which is the chief of staff, who is the orchestrator of this board. So that farms out work, and it'll go through everything that's in next through to work in progress. When it thinks it's done, it'll move it to QA. That then pings the QA role, and the QA then inspects it and does a test against the acceptance criteria and definition of done that was scoped out before as it came out of the backlog and into next. When the QA gives it a pass, it goes into review, and that's when I then review it. And if I think it's good, then it goes to done. If I think it's not good, I say to the chief of staff, you need to sort something out here, and it will go back and tell the team member directly. And so I'm the only person, again, I am the human who is accountable. I'm the only human that says, yes, this is actually done, and marks it as complete. Again, no third-party tools required for that workflow. Agents talking to each other, all sitting as text files. No complex database, no extra subscriptions. And so when you're mid-session, it's got to end at some point, and making sure stuff gets written back is really important. Otherwise, things are trapped in a model to a degree until you do this step. So there's a skill called /archive, and that knows then to go and update the context with anything that's important, the memory with a standard format, including next actions and decisions and key insights from the session. And the key thing it does is it creates a full archive transcript. So one of the things a lot of people don't know with these apps is they're not cloud synced. They are on your hard drive. It's a little bit different with Codex, but not properly. Extremely brittle with Claude. So all of your conversation is in a hidden JSON file on your hard drive. And for most people, that might not mean anything. And that's exactly why you should be scared about it, because it's a hidden system file or a script. And that actually contains the full transcript. And without that, even when Claude does a compaction, quite often you can't scroll up. So anything that happens before that compaction, you can no longer see, let alone if there's an app corruption or any other device crash or anything else that does happen where all your work can then be disappeared. So this archive step means it's being written back to that text file. And now that text file I've got synced into multiple places, across multiple devices, including my phone. So I can always see that information and access it there. And just to show that, so all these other ones were in Codex /ChatGPT, and I've switched over to Claude, Opus 5, fresh model. And so I've just been able to now continue that session. I've spun it up and said, you're the demo CIO. It's then picked up its state files from the hard drive, and then I can say to it, what's the last thing I asked you? And it continues as if it's the same team member, just now in a different model. So I just switched from ChatGPT to Claude, and nothing changed. It's got all the same context, all the same memory, the same, as if I had the same conversation, because it's got the full archive threads. So it's all there ready to go. So the big question, what work would you love to be able to continue without having to explain everything over and over again? And ideally, whatever that piece of work is, if it relates to what's that team member you'd love to have, If they're in sync, then you've probably got some pretty obvious next things to do. So I'm going to fly through this because we've sort of been talking about it as we go. And so this is probably more for if you do want to refer back to it and understand the layers and the moving parts. But as a good designer, I start with design principles. And because I like to go from strategy all the way through to pixels, DevOps, and AI, that actually becomes real and becomes architecture. So the value and design principles for this, number one, said it many times, but it is absolutely critical, is that the human is still accountable. No matter what, we're the ones on the hook. Keeping and protecting that durable layer, so all of that value that you built up is then stored in files, formats, and places you control, not in the interwebs. So being able to keep that clean, controlled, but you still need to do your backups, obviously, but you're then in control of your own data and all of that value that you created. It's really important to make the boundary explicit, what AI can do, what it can't do. And as part of that, I think it's really important, and it does take effort, is that we keep all that work that the agents and the synthetic team are doing observable and traceable. And that's why it's one of the key reasons I have that archive with the full transcript, so I know all the things I said and all the things it said, all the outputs it created, and also things like the agent daily log. So each team member is literally writing to a daily log saying, I just did this piece of work, which means there's a record of it that I can see, but then other team members, other synthetic team members can see that as well. A decision log, if they are explicit decisions where I say write that to the log, or there's actually some thresholds where as we're talking about things and decisions are actually tacitly made, I also have those written off to a decision log as well. So I can always go back and go, what was that decision that we made and how did that work? Key thing of keeping the engine swappable, we don't want to be locked in and hostage, especially as these things get more value. And they're more likely to get more value from here than less. Design for resilience, so it's very safe to assume that tools will fail, things will crash, there will be model changes, you will change your device, pricing will change. So making recovery actually part of the system design and designing for that. So it's not a surprise when it happens. Those recovery paths are already natural and built in. A key one is that building for regen. So all of that value gets written back, and then the reusable pattern is then built on. So the system becomes stronger over time. And if we optimize for that compounding and we do real work with it, we don't try and do it all at once. We let that structure earn its place. So you don't want to go too heavy too soon, but you keep what works, you write it back, and then let the compounding happen. And compounding is a beautiful thing if it's taking you in the right direction. So that, as a living loop, to try and talk about it in simpler terms, is a quick fly through of the foundation. So that's all your data, all your bits and pieces, the playbook, what are the rules of the game, how does the system actually work, the boundary, what's in and out. The engines are on the outside of the boundary. They are rented intelligence. They are not the system. The studio, where all the fun stuff happens, where I get to hang out with my synthetic team, and then I can then bring us as a collective set to other people that I collaborate with who also have their synthetic teams. But then we get to collaborate at that level rather than trying to mash all the synthetic teams and agents together. The regen happens because it goes up and it gets written back down. And then through that playbook, we get that continuity. And so I'm going to fly through this. The foundation, all the good stuff. Playbook, the boundary, the engines. This is also, you can refer back to it if you want later. And the studio. And so some quick reflections on what I've learnt over the last, to one degree or another, these experiments have been in progress for 30 plus years, but the Gen AI specific part have been in play for about 3.5 years. The number one thing, which I've said over and over, so hopefully you understand, I think it's really important, is that when I'm working with my synthetic team, I'm accountable for whatever it does. The quality of the output, if it's good, bad, or otherwise, I can't say the computer did it. It's me. And I'm the one who is on the hook for that and accountable. There's so much change. There's so many things to learn, that experimenting with things rather than I won't make a start until I've got the right time or the right conditions, they'll never be right, and it's not going to get still. So jumping in, experimenting, playing with it, and embracing the reality, which can be inconvenient at times when progress is non-linear. So there are times when things crash or features regress or disappear or models literally go offline. And so that's going to continue to happen. So one, designing for that to be a reality, and how we think about our workflows and how critical our dependence is on some of these tools is a really important thing, especially in mission critical type environments. We need to be mindful that we can't assume everything's going to be up all the time and working as we'd hope. Every model still has, this is an experiment that makes mistakes. I think most of us have become blind to that little warning, but we're in a global experiment and we are part of the model maker's lab. This isn't a finished product, and they don't pretend it is either. One that is a hard lesson to learn, remember, apply is that multitasking is really expensive. And it's something which over years and decades I've sort of built habits and rituals and momentum around, trying to design for better focus and less multitasking. The nature of working with a synthetic team can break that really quickly, because it's off paralleling your thinking in multiple directions, sometimes at once. And as the human, we're the slowest for a lot of this stuff. And if we're going to stay as the person who's actually accountable, then we need to actually review it and not get lazy and go, good enough, the model did it, so it must be right, and we'll chuck it out with our name on it. I, again, encourage no one to ever do that, or at least not for a long time yet. And it means that task switching of looking at what different team members are doing and doing that in rapid succession. So trying to build workflows around that, which is where the Kanban board, and I'm now not needing to be the glue that pastes things from one team member to another. I can actually now have that workflow managed more directly with a separate QA role, who I've told explicitly, or we've co-designed it often, what the acceptance criteria is. So when I'm reviewing it, it's much less likely to need rework and for me to be jumping in and micromanaging and spoon feeding the next step in a process. But as you start out, there's the fear of being kind of the bottleneck that's holding everything up, and it will probably be true. But finding a way to not let that completely derail your ways of working where you have built up good habits. Lots around data sovereignty and stewardship. It's all running on our data. How that data got there in the first place, there's lots of question marks, and some of them aren't even questions. Thinking about what that might mean going forward. The responsible AI, the ethical AI, the climate impacts, these are all things not to ignore. But I think there are also things not to get freaked out about and wave our arms around and therefore not play. I think the way we play actually has a big degree in shaping how some of these things are made and what patterns go forward and which ones sort of get culled out. That might be overly optimistic, but that's what I'm going to hold on to. And a key one is, and it's probably come all the way through, is resilience over lock-in. So a lot of what I've been talking about has been really filling product gaps in the current version of the products. And a lot of that is because a lot of those data gaps and memory and things being backed up, etc., have come because Codex and Claude Code came from development environments where all of that was written back, or most of it was written back into repos and backed up to the cloud. And there was a lot of other back-end infrastructure there. As they wrapped a skin around it to make it more accessible to knowledge workers who don't have that infrastructure, they didn't bother filling those product gaps. And so right now, it means filling those product gaps. That's not going to last forever, and they're already making big steps to try and sort out memory and do a bunch of those things. The way they're choosing to sort that out, of course, is so you put even more of your stuff into their platform. They hold it for you nice and safe, but they're the only ones that hold it nice and safe. And so you get product lock-in and you're a hostage to their platform. And as they make changes, and they already are and have, as they change their pricing, as they change different ways of operating, if you want to be able to access your stuff and keep all the value that you built up, you've got no real choice but to use their platform. So I don't want to be in that situation, and I recommend most people don't want to be in that situation. So designing around that, so there's no single point of failure in the tools, the different providers of the platforms, or their pricing models as they change. And so the big question, because that was a blah of a lot of stuff, and there's probably going to be some things to unpack, but to get started, what's one real piece of work where you could test this, not have it all magically working? So test, and it could, ideally in a safe to fail way where it's a safe place to experiment, learn some stuff, and be able to iterate. Have you got anything in mind where you go, I reckon I'll use it in this way? You might have your own music meanderings where it's a creative project off the side, but it all went sideways. No one's going to be impacted. No critical data's lost. If you can think of some things like that within your life and whole of life, it doesn't all have to be business and work related, then that's probably a good place to start. And starting with something nice and simple and safe, building some things up around it, see what's working, what's not working. And as you feel comfortable with the way it does certain things and how you're backing up data and what that whole experience feels like, then you might choose to give it more, but not giving the models and the apps all your things all at once. I would definitely recommend against that. So thinking about what's that real thing that you could do, but nice and slow. So stuff you could do next is, what is that thing that's, it's valuable, but it's real, but it's not necessarily high risk if anything goes a bit weird with it. If you create one little folder and workspace, so you don't need to do a year-long curation of all your data sets and get them all nice and clean before you start, but just start with the data that you need and you feel okay or good about putting into the models, into the neural network. Write that simple context, save some useful stuff. And again, all of this is in the context of using the desktop app. You won't be able to do a lot of this and get the same kind of value out of it if you're still using it in the browser. But think about the principles of, I want to be able to see what it's actually done. What work did it do? What decisions did it make? Did I agree with that decision? Did it operate within what I think are safe boundaries? So being able to set up a way to then build that. And then the stuff that's working, you keep using and you turn those into skills. Riley mentioned before, there's lots of ways to create skills now that can be, copying a workflow through a screen record, which they're doing natively now. It can literally be, I just had a conversation with you and we created this output. Now reverse engineer the good version of that back into a skill that's reusable, which is the method that I still use because I don't have much repeatable stuff to screen record. So the key thing is to start with one real workflow and then let the structure earn its place from there. And so this has all been about the principles and the shape. But if you want some help navigating all of this and doing a personalized version where it's designed around the way you work, your goals or your data, the risk profile, then happy to have a chat. And also curious if that's, there's different versions of this I'm thinking of doing. depending on where there's interest. This is definitely where it starts crossing over into the paid version of things rather than the free online workshop. But there's versions where doing this as sort of one-to-one or with a team in sort of more organizational context, or even doing like a build-along session as sort of a online where guiding you through your own, but in sort of a group setting. So there's a few different options there, ways I'm looking at possibly taking it forward depending on what people are interested in. So that's the fire hose. There was plenty of good stuff in the chat. Any questions that have come up that are burning, even if they're not burning?
I thought there was two pretty interesting ones. One was how do you start in terms of you've got skills behind some of that, some of the work that you're already getting when you got it to spin up its own little sort of onboarding essentially for whatever that new sort of agent was. What would you say would be the first thing you would start with? Would you start with a skill, or would you start with another way or something like that?
So one way is I can share my version of it, and at least the headings, because the specifics is where it gets less valuable. The key thing is if you even just say to a synthetic team member, you are my guide, help me do this, and interview me to work out what's important. And then you can, and that's how I built my different ones. So I didn't start with like a master plan and go, it should do this, this, and this. It's happened iteratively and organically over time, and then reverse engineered into a skill that's repeatable. And so a lot of this is not about trying to get it right in the first shot. And there are loads of different skill libraries and stuff that you can go and download. That can be useful if it's a really repeatable common task. But a lot of the value is actually in the thinking, not the specific text files. So being able to have that interaction with your agent and get it to ask you questions is where a lot of the value is. And then it's making something that's repeatable, but not trying to make it repeatable for step one.
Awesome. Yeah, I got it to interview me more than once, but yeah, I think that's a good way to do it. Because I can talk off the top of my head about something, but like it takes me a little bit of time to write it down.
And I'm sure everyone's seen now, like if you can get comfortable talking to your device, you can do that in dictation mode. You can now do it with the models with the real-time text mode. There's tools like Whisperflow. There's a Google one as well that they released a few months ago. There's lots of options which can, if your natural way of processing is verbally, then that can be a very quick way to get a lot of volume out of your head. Personally, I'm of the school of I write to think, and so I don't have quite the same level of experience with it. I do use it for some stuff, but being able to have that quick interaction and for it to iterate over time, that's the key thing. So I'm still now, like literally today, saying to my CIO, it's doing this, you're not printing the, threads aren't printing the date properly like they were, what's going on? And it'll go find the root cause for me, go, we need to strengthen up that rule here, and do you approve this rule? And then I say yes, and it goes and rewrites into a text file. So, it's constantly being iterated, but it's more about the mindset and having that approach to it than it is having the perfect prompt.
Yeah, great. Another one was, how many hours do you think you put into to the point of actually getting positive compounding return?
Yes, good question, Jess. To start seeing some return, it's a hard one to answer, because when I started, the models were about 1% of the capability and the apps around them of what they are now. So it's been 3.5 years of constant experimentation, and a lot of those experiments were extremely frustrating and no value return. the value return has been understanding how things have worked and the deeper knowledge and experience around that. It's now at the point where you could spend a day or two, even less, to start getting some value immediately, to get a fuller system built out. That's, a few hours over a few weeks and months. But to have one thing done well, that's probably a few hours now with a little bit of base infrastructure as a starting point.
Yeah, I would agree on the pretty quick turnaround. I've just changed jobs and I've rebuilt my own little one at work that I've just started as a brand new sort of instance. And it didn't take me more than half, like not even a couple of hours. But probably about three or four hours, I'd say. So it's my own personal onboarding system to the company as well, because I kind of had to gather enough internal information to be able to kind of, onboard myself. And so at the same time, I just onboarded, essentially a new nascent kind of OS as well, starting to anyway. Does anyone?
Sorry, just a quick one. Something we were talking about the other day, Jess, that makes a huge difference is when you're setting up, when you're onboarding, and you sort of mentioned a little bit there, Riley, when you're onboarding and you're setting up your context, it makes a massive difference if you go through a step of actively creating a data library as part of your context file. So curating that a bit, not as in you need to go get all the files and put them in one place, but getting the model to go within the boundaries that you've said of go have a look around here, and then do a bit of a review of the data it's found and the different sources to go, yes, this is current and reliable. This should have a higher weighting than this other thing from 3 years ago under a whole different strategy. So that effort in just reviewing and curating the data library a bit means that you've got a much higher quality base and context then build off, and you get a lot less drift, and also helps with the context window, but won't go into that side of things.
Cool. Jessie, did you have a response? Sorry.
Sure. Thanks. I was nervous I was going to take up time and go down a rabbit hole. But so, I played with that data library idea for about 2 hours on the weekend. What I found was with Copilot, it kept coming back saying, yeah, I can see it all. And so what was your phrase, Ben? Trust but verify? No.
Yes. KGB phrase.
KGB phrase, right? So I was like, okay, well, tell me what's in that document. And I think I eventually realized that it couldn't actually really see what was in the company SharePoint. But I was still learning the interaction. So I still got something out of it, but I still don't know if technically it can see the things I want it to see. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a good example of the 2025, 2024 version of a lot of these experiments, where with Copilot, Microsoft Copilot, you're probably still in a situation where you'll need to curate those files into a safe place and say, look at that, because it's a bit weak on doing stuff that the other models are able to do. Mm. But if you do the show me what's in it, and it comes back with sensible stuff, then, that's part of that test and learn of you're saying one thing, but show me evidence of that before I believe that and start doubling down on it. Otherwise, definitely in hallucination land.
Yeah, love it. Thanks.
Cool. Probably got time for one more question. What have you? So I've got a couple here, but what? Have you tried the Australian sovereign AI model from Trellis Data? Trellis Data, is that how you say it?
No, I haven't played with any of the local models. It's something that sort of keeping an eye on, but I have intentionally taken predominantly a non-tech approach to Gen AI. All of my experiments over the last 3.5 years, I've stayed away from having to do anything that's starting to get into code or repos or stuff that I do when I'm designing and building digital product, but not stuff that I want to do in a Gen AI context, because I know how fast it's moving and I see a lot of that's going to be obsolete before it's valuable. And then it just builds up the overhead of trying to learn and manage all of this stuff anyway. But I think at a principle level and the conceptual level of the sovereign versions of models, I think it's going to be, over the next 6 to 12 months, one of the hottest topics, especially now that we've had the US government ban and make Anthropic take Fable 5 offline for a few weeks. They have said that they now want early view of new models being released. Australia has talked about doing a similar thing. OpenAI has talked about giving the US government 5% shares, which does that accelerate preference, actually put up guardrails. All of these things are not really known. So having access to the stuff that we need and when we need it is definitely in flux at the moment. And then in the last week as well, a couple of the Chinese open source models are performing near benchmark of Opus 4.8. So pretty much frontier model with the weights and being open source, but you need there's about 2 terabytes of data for to be able to tinker with the weights and run it locally. So it's not yet at the point where it's light enough to really be able to use it for most people. But I think that side of things, the sovereign aspect, the offline, the open source, are all conversations that are going to ramp up even more over the next 6 to 12 months. And that's also part of the design principle that I've built around here, is those engines are swappable. And so I'm hanging out for the time when I can be truly offline and have a local model that can do the bulk of what I need, and I'm not actually even needing the internet to be up anymore. And I reckon that's no more than 12 months away.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time tonight, Ben, and sharing your setup and what you've learned along the way. It was great to have you back, and hopefully you get some anyone who's keen to find out more, then we can certainly follow this up with Ben and find out what he's doing.
If you hit that QR code, you can book a discovery call, but you can also see music meanderings and photo meanderings. So if you're curious about what these little projects are, you'll see that on that same QR code, because it goes to my link tree.
Bonus ad there. Thank you very much. We will follow this up with the recording, all things being equal at the end of this when we hang up. But yeah, join me in thanking Ben, and
Awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone. Great to see you all, and more soon.